to the Environmental and Water Resources Engineering podcast in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at CSU, brought to you by EWRI-CSU. Here we get to know CSU professors, water and environmental professionals, and learn more about their work. My name is Joe Pugh. I am the current president of EWRI-CSU just as of January of this year. So I'm a new appointee to this role, and I'm looking forward to being here for the next little while and continuing with this organization. Right now, I'm finishing up my master's degree in civil engineering and hoping to continue on and pursue a PhD after that.
Hi, I'm Jessica Baker. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at CSU. And I'm a part of the Environmental Fluid Mechanics Lab, as well as a fluids TA for the undergraduate levels this semester.
Great. And we are speaking with Dr. Susan DeLong this morning. Dr. DeLong is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at CSU. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Science and Molecular and Cell Biology from the University of California at Berkeley. She then went on to receive an MS in Environmental Engineering from University of Texas at Austin. And then she continued with a PhD in civil engineering at the same institution with the title of her dissertation for that PhD was Molecular Biology Tools for Identification and Quantification of Perchlorate Reduction Genes in Biotreatment Applications. So thank you, Dr. DeLong, for joining us this morning. Welcome, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great, it's good to have you. We just like to open up with a few get to know you questions, icebreaker questions. From your CV, you attended the University of Texas at Austin. Hoping to maybe have you say a few things about living in Austin for a while, what that was like living in the South, and if there's anything there that you really enjoyed about Austin.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I grew up in a big city, and doing my PhD at Berkeley, spending time in the Bay Area, I was pretty used to kind of California, big city. You know, even though I grew up in a suburb, I was used to places with a lot of people. And when I got to Austin, I really enjoyed the people that I met there. It had a more of a small town feel. People were just really friendly, and it was a great place to spend 7 years of my life getting my PhD. And the department, the Civil and Environmental Engineering department at the University of Texas at Austin is a really top-notch department with really excellent people. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, that UT Austin is an excellent program. And I believe one of your colleagues, Dr. Elson Carter, also received her PhD from UT Austin.
She did, as well as our department head, Dr. Chuck Shackelford.
Yeah,
so
great. So yeah, now you found yourself here at CSU in Fort Collins, and you've started a family. You have a couple kids. Is that correct?
Yes, I've got 2 boys that keep me busy.
Yes, and what are some things that you like to do with them, to spend time with them?
Well, they like to play soccer, so I spend a lot of time watching them play soccer and just being outside, biking and being active and hiking and enjoying this, really great state of Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe some sledding this weekend. If you get some snow.
Yeah, I'm just gonna watch though.
Good. Yeah, thanks for indulging us a little bit on those questions.
So Dr. DeLong, we were wondering if you could share a little bit about your background, why you studied what you studied, and kind of that process of moving on to graduate school.
Sure. Sure, yeah. So I feel like to answer this question, I have to begin with my background and how I grew up and what motivated me to study environmental engineering. So I grew up in Los Angeles, as I told you earlier, and growing up in that environment, that urban environment with pretty serious air pollution problems, and also spending a lot of time in nature with my family. As a child, I really I became interested in environmental issues at a very early age. And when I was deciding on what to major in college, I decided to major in environmental science. I wanted to be a scientist. Along the way, I had to take biology courses, and I discovered that I really loved molecular biology. So I decided to double major in that as well. And after graduating, I worked in research and development in an academic lab for a couple of years, and I worked for a pharmaceutical company for a year. But what I really wanted to do was focus on solving environmental problems. And I spent quite a bit of time talking to a lot of different people about how I could take my scientific background and use that to actually solve problems. And along the way, I realized that what I really wanted to do was be an engineer, like my dad, who probably told me that all along. And so I decided to go to graduate school and get my master's degree in environmental engineering, and then continue on for a PhD. And what was really lovely for me is that I discovered that at the time, and continuing now, there's a big interest in using molecular biology tools to study bacteria that degrade contaminants, whether that's in wastewater or cleaning up contaminated sites like old refineries where there's oil spills and leaking tanks underground, or other contaminated sites. And so I was actually able to, in my graduate work and continuing on in my research now, apply all of the molecular biology skills and techniques that I had learned in the classroom, and then learned how to actually do in the laboratory while working in research after my bachelor's degree. I was able to apply all of those molecular skills to this environmental engineering discipline. And that's really my niche areas is how can we use molecular tools to understand microbes that do useful things for us in the engineering space, and use that knowledge to engineer better solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really interesting because both Joe and we both have actually Bachelor's of Arts degrees in different disciplines. I know mine was in biochemistry, and Joe, you were biology, right?
Yeah, just general bio.
Just bio. But we both decided to switch into engineering. And so it was definitely a transition, but at least I've experienced having that background knowledge is helpful, and being able to apply it into the engineering field. I wonder if you could just share just briefly on kind of that transition from kind of the more natural science focus to the technical science.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I really love this sort of curved, tortuous path I've taken, because I think it gives me a really unique perspective and a unique lens, and a way to contribute that's different from other people. And I've never stopped thinking like a biologist to some degree. So it's really that I've merged these two ways of thinking, and that allows me to do something unique. So I always encourage students to not ever think that you've made a mistake along your path. It's all part of becoming who you are, and the unique person and the unique contributions you can make. So I think it works out really well to have these various backgrounds. All of the problems that we're facing currently are extremely interdisciplinary. And so having that interdisciplinary knowledge and skill set within, one person enables you to do things that other people can't do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. And just along with that, more of a curved path, having a little bit more time to pick up different sorts of skills, taking the BA route as an undergrad, giving you a chance to also pick up some communication and writing skills as well. think that's something that Jess and I also have been really grateful for, is having a liberal arts degree and learning some writing skills. And I took your 441 class. Is it water quality analysis? Yeah. And the writing component of that class is quite large. And I was wondering if you could just maybe say a couple of things on what you see as the importance of being able to write as an engineer, and maybe for someone who is listening to this and thinking, I know that I probably haven't had enough training as a writer so far. What are some basic pointers or skills that you might be able to pass along to them?
Sure. I think, everyone has a different experience, but for me, growing up with, talents in math and science and the technical, I received this message growing up that communication and writing was going to be less important for me. And that's really not true. As engineers, we communicate so much. We communicate with our colleagues, we communicate in environmental engineering and civil engineering. A lot of times we need to write a lot of reports to communicate to our clients. Ideally, we should be able to communicate with the public. And so communication skills are incredibly important. In academia, we need to secure funding for our research. So a big aspect of our work is writing proposals to communicate our research ideas and to get funding. The other thing for me, and I think partly why I've gotten so interested in helping students learn how to write, and I was actually telling my class this yesterday, I hate reading things that are badly written. It drives me insane. I want to understand. And if something's written in a way that's unclear and I can't make sense of it, it's very frustrating. And I think that all of us need to, take ownership of communicating our own work in a way that helps the reader understand and helps the audience understand and helps us move forward with whatever work we're trying to do, because we're all able to understand what the other person is doing. I think that there are a lot of resources to help you write out there, and I actually didn't discover those resources until I had finished my PhD. But there are a lot of really excellent books on how to write well, how to structure pieces. And the materials that I've developed for my classes, as well as the online writing class that I developed at CSU that you mentioned, are built on books that I would highly recommend people seek out. And the other thing I'll just say about writing really quick is it's a process, and part of that process is getting feedback. And the more read that's on the page, the better that feedback is. And it's really a gift that someone's taken the time to put all that red on the page for you. So, just embrace the process. We've all been there. The best writers, the most professional writers that you can think of also go through that process of lots of red on the page. It's the way you get to a good product.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's you mentioned, just having a sense of ownership over your work in which you write. And Jess and I are both teaching the undergraduate fluids class this semester, and the students there are writing quite a bit of lab reports, and trying to encourage them to think about the report not as just as an assignment that they turn in for to check off a box, but this is a direct reflection of your own work. So you're really not going to reach that level of quality until you take some ownership over the project, and be proud to have someone read that work and be like, hey, I understood what you're trying to say, and it came across clearly. So
skills, what I always try to tell my classes, that those skills will carry you into a more successful career.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always good to bring it back to potentially boosting career prospects, because in a practical sense, that's important. It's very important.
And even as a TA, I've had the opportunity to actually be the writing fellow for Dr. DeLong's water quality analysis class. And in that process, I learned how to write in a more efficient manner. The more papers I read, the more I realized what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And so even editing papers actually gain writing skills as well. At least I found, and I found my writing improve through that process.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we kind of understand, what's brought you to CSU, and sort of why biology, why these molecular tools for analysis, and why environmental engineering. But I was wondering if you could say just a little bit more about, kind of currently what your motivation is. What are you thinking about when you get into the office in the morning, or your home office? There's this idea of wicked problems that we try to solve in engineering that can just be real head scratchers at times. And but they need to be addressed. They're important problems, and it comes down to lives. It comes down to large economic costs and that sort of thing. So, would you mind just saying a little bit about sort of what you're currently thinking about in terms of the types of problems that you hope to solve and that sort of thing?
Sure. So I guess I have two kind of big research focus areas right now that are really in the research area, and one of them has to do with removing emerging contaminants, or contaminants that we are now starting to pay more attention to in municipal wastewater or other types of contaminated water. And the contaminants that I'm referring to are things like pharmaceuticals that we take that are not fully metabolized and therefore excreted and make it into our wastewater systems. Other chemicals that we use in our homes or in personal care products, like sunscreen chemicals and various chemicals like you can think of like that. Many of them are xenobiotic compounds, meaning that they're foreign to nature, and so they're not well biodegraded. They're not well removed by conventional wastewater treatment processes. And there's a growing recognition that these kinds of contaminants make it into the effluent of wastewater treatment plants, and thus into surface water bodies, and thus potentially into drinking water sources, and potentially into drinking water, and certainly into ecosystems. And these contaminants are tricky to remove. There's a couple of approaches people are thinking about. One is to take a biological treatment route using bacteria that can degrade these contaminants. And then the competing approaches are physical chemical treatment processes, which work well, but they're very energy intensive and they tend to be expensive. And they have some waste products as well that have to be dealt with. And so I've really focused on developing biological treatment processes. So we actually know that a lot of these contaminants are biodegradable, but the microbes that degrade them are sort of special microbes. And so we have to be able to identify those special microbes and get those microbes to grow and establish and be active in water treatment processes in order to use biological treatment technologies to reliably remove these kinds of contaminants. I think it's really important that we invest in developing biological treatment processes because they are low energy, low carbon footprint, or they can be if we do it right, low energy, low carbon footprint technologies. And that is just a place where wastewater treatment connects back to a larger problem that we all are well aware of, which is global climate change. So our project that we're working on right now has to do with developing molecular biology tools to identify these microbes, because if we could detect and monitor them, that would be a tool that would help us design and operate successful biological treatment processes. So that's one big area that I've been focusing on that takes advantage of my skills and background. And then another big area that we've been working on is biofuels and bio-based chemical production from waste materials. As an environmental engineer, we always have thought about waste. Environmental engineers have designed landfills from the beginning. And so we are approaching the bioenergy problem and the renewable energy portfolio problem using waste as a feedstock rather than something like, bioenergy crops. And our project is, we have a project right now, it involves a lot of different people with the Department of Energy that's focused on using bacteria to convert organic waste like food waste and animal waste like manure, converting those to useful chemicals that can be either upgraded into fuels or converted into other chemicals, because many things that products that are made in society require, chemicals to make plastics, et cetera, like that. So the problem is not just fuels. The problem is everything that, all the products that we use in civilization that are petroleum based. So we're looking at making useful chemicals from waste using bacteria.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Both of those projects sound fascinating. I have a few questions on the first one with the wastewater treatment. Historically, have we thought, just generally as engineers, have we thought a lot about using bacteria as sort of the means to treat our water? I mean, that for someone from like a layperson sort of view, that seems a bit counterintuitive. Bacteria are germs, they're bad, and keep them out of our water, but some can be helpful.
Right. Well, first, let me say very few bacteria are actually germs. There are so many good bacteria out there, and I think that's, that idea is gaining traction, and people are starting to understand that with microbiome science becoming popular and the use of probiotics for digestive health, and people are starting to recognize that the majority of microbes on the planet do really good things, and the pathogens are certainly problems for human health, but they're the odd ones out in many regards. Yes, we've been using bacteria to treat wastewater from the beginning. One of the key processes in typical municipal wastewater treatment is a process called activated sludge. And in that process, we basically provide oxygen to bacteria so that they can consume the organic contaminants in wastewater and clean it up for us. And then we remove the bacteria from that water in a downstream process. So bacteria have been cleaning wastewater. It's the natural way that waste products are broken down in nature. And as engineers, we do it in controlled tanks where we control the rate of oxygen that we deliver and the time the water spends in there, so that we can use natural processes to clean the water and protect the downstream ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the sort of the emerging contaminants and with the personal care products and the pharmaceuticals, those are, there's kind of a fear factor with that, just because the public knowledge, the understanding on that is not too clear as of now. And the fact that possibly a lot of these contaminants are bypassing, our conventional wastewater treatment methods and then continuing downstream. Do you see the solution more so as being trying to limit the input on the upstream end, as having, trying to get less personal care products into our wastewater stream, or is it more so that's sort of uncontrollable, and what we really need to do is focus on treating it at the downstream end?
Yeah, so first of all, on the fear factor side, I have to say that the concentrations of these chemicals are extremely, extremely low. And one of the reasons that we're paying attention to them now is because analytical chemists who develop methods that allow us to measure these types of contaminants have advanced methods so far that we're able to detect these chemicals at very, very tiny concentrations. And these tiny, tiny concentrations that make it into the ecosystem, then that goes through a drinking water treatment process before you drink. So those concentrations get even tinier. So, I think it's an important problem for ecosystem health. And if you think about how much water we all should be drinking every day, I do think it's a problem that needs to be addressed, but not necessarily something that should ensue mass panic. I think we need to work on it. And particularly, the problem becomes relevant when you're in an arid region that needs to think about things like water reuse.
Absolutely.
With respect to where to target the problem, I think that an understanding of how biodegradable contaminants are can help us decide which chemicals are a good idea and suitable to develop into products, and where we might need to rethink products. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, people are always going to want to have access to any pharmaceutical chemicals that improve their health. And so I don't think we don't want to be in a position to say, the pharmaceutical industry shouldn't develop these medicines because they're hard to remove from water. We should try to figure out how to remove them from water. So I think depending on the chemical, there might be different answers, but our goal right now is to figure out how well can we remove the chemicals that are already in common use, and can we do that in a way that's really low energy and also effective.
And what are some of the limiting factors for those specialized bacteria? Is it the temperature that they thrive at? Is it the type of energy source that they need to live? Is it just not being able to get enough population to have a significant effect? What are some of the limiting factors?
Yeah, truly, we're just barely learning the answer to that question. And that's part of the problem. We don't exactly know the best way to make the specialized microbes thrive. And it's really worth understanding that when we're talking about things like pharmaceuticals and personal care product chemicals, it's a very long list of chemicals that have different structures. And so when I say special bacteria, I'm massively oversimplifying. There's probably many different types of microbes that we need to grow and have thrive, and they may all have different optimal conditions. So the first trick is figuring out which kind of microbes are good at degrading particular contaminants, understanding how to get those types of microbes to thrive, whether it's what you have to feed them or what pH they like, etc. And then the other important thing to think about in the context of wastewater is you're not going to be dealing with a sterile environment. There's going to be microbes all over the place. And so what you really have to do is figure out, well, which microbes can you use that could establish, grow, and be active within the context of this larger microbial community. And so we need really robust microbes that can thrive. And so these are all really like big problems that are unresolved at this time.
Yeah.
I'll be busy for a while, I guess.
Yeah, in regard to the second project, you talked about with the wastewater using microbes is kind of like a conventional part of the conventional treatment, but it seems that using waste as an energy source is kind of a newer thing that we're trying to adopt. And I wonder if you could talk about kind of the, what's the level of adoption of this method, or what are the barriers that you see in having these methods using waste as energy sources to be adopted in society?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because really actually converting waste to some type of energy is not that new either. The most traditional process is anaerobic digestion. This is a natural process where microbes convert waste to methane, which is biogas, which is the same as natural gas essentially. And anaerobic digestion has been used to treat organic waste in wastewater treatment plant processes for ages and ages. Anaerobic digestion has been used in developing countries to make biogas as a fuel source, for a long time. animal manure is often digested to produce methane. The most conventional technologies use a lot of water, so they're used more in regions that don't have water limitations like we do here in Colorado. One of the problems, though, is that the economics don't work very well. Natural gas is cheap, and converting these organic wastes to natural gas, because of the engineering involved, there's capital costs and operational costs that make it hard for that biogas that you produce to compete with natural gas. It's also dirtier. There's other contaminants that have to be removed from it, and that adds cost to the process. So the current kind of pivot in thinking around how we can use waste to make energy is that we need to make higher value products. We need to make chemicals that can turn into liquid fuels and other chemicals that have a much higher market value to drive adoption of these technologies more broadly.
Are there currently any interesting prospects for that your research group is looking into or that you've read about lately?
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Energy project that I was referring to earlier is entirely focused on making fatty acids and it's kind of fuel pipeline chemicals. And this is a big area of research that various people all over the country as well as the globe are working on. What can we make from waste that has a high enough market value that this kind of technology can be adopted, and we can stop putting things like food waste in landfills, which is really a wasted resource.
Yeah. Just to think about all of those resources and water that goes into producing the food, and then only a fraction of it gets consumed. Yeah, that's a huge problem. Going back to what you said about climate change, I think I've read and seen before that limiting the amount of particularly food waste that we produce is a huge aspect of addressing that climate problem and overall reducing our CO2 emissions.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, for many reasons. Certainly, we can have fugitive methane produced in landfills, and methane is a greenhouse gas. If you're not capturing it and using it, producing food has a big carbon footprint because of the cost and energy required to make fertilizers. So there's many different places in this kind of food, energy, water, waste cycle to intervene and impact climate change.
Yeah. Like you mentioned earlier, these are wicked problems. They are really complex, and you can't really get a pure gain because you're going to lose out in some other area. But something like you mentioned, like food waste, it is detrimental in a lot of ways, and it's tackling something like that is probably going to get you more benefit than it is you're going to lose out on things. So
I think part of what makes these wicked problems is that the problem is well outside the box of technology. We need technological solutions, but then it has to fit in a whole system where there's, sociological, political, infrastructure, all these different aspects that require deep collaboration across disciplines to really actually impactfully solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. On some of your current projects, are you involved in collaboration with people outside of that traditional technological disciplines, whether they be engineers or natural sciences?
We do have an education component in our Department of Energy project, and there's going to be some educational components that will roll out at the new Western Center, and so we have that piece. I also might mention our Interfuse program here at CSU for people interested in food, energy, and water. And as part of that program, there's a network of faculty across disciplines. And this program allows students to get training in systems thinking. and some of these other disciplines that, tangential training that helps them be at least conversational in these other disciplines as part of their PhD. And so some of my students are starting to engage in some of these systems analyses as part of their work so that we can think a little bit more broadly about how well our solutions kind of plug into the larger context.
Yeah. It seems like there's been a reckoning of sorts of the importance of that, of being able to talk to others outside of your discipline and value their inputs.
Mm-hmm. It's hard though, and I think I would just really encourage everyone to recognize that need and invest in growing those skills, but it's not easy.
So with recently you've been featured in some is it an NPR interview, a radio interview, with your work with the wastewater testing for COVID-19 monitoring. That's the sudden wave of COVID-19 and coming on us just about a year ago, required a really quick response. So how did that idea for testing the wastewater come about? Was that something that you saw that you and some students could do, or was that an opportunity brought to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's this field called wastewater epidemiology, where people monitor wastewater for diseases, and that data can provide information on disease prevalence. I think its most prominent prior examples are in polio. And so there were people in Europe and across the country here who immediately recognized that we could consider doing wastewater epidemiology for COVID because that was actually their primary field of study. Back in March, people started to reach out to me, some consulting companies started to reach out to me about doing COVID wastewater epidemiology here in Colorado, recognizing that I had this background in applying molecular biology tools in environmentally engineered systems. And so fundamentally, I have the skills to do it, although I've never studied viruses previously. Mm-hmm. And then our Water Research Foundation, which is a global foundation that happens to be based here in Colorado, did a summit on wastewater epidemiology back in March. And it was very widely attended internationally. And I attended that and became convinced of the value of wastewater epidemiology. And so the true value of this is that people will shed the virus in their feces and into the wastewater early on in infection before they're symptomatic, before they realize they're sick, which is one of the riskiest times with COVID, right? Because once you realize you're sick, then you can stay home. It's when you don't realize you're sick that you're most likely to infect other people. And we can detect that signal in the wastewater early before people start to feel sick. We can also detect the infection of people who never feel sick. We know a lot of people are asymptomatic. They still shed the virus. They're still infected. It's still in their system. So the level of COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus in wastewater is an indicator of the level of infection, and the signal is early. So we get advanced warning that things are changing and decisions need to be made to try to address that. So after learning all of these important aspects of wastewater epidemiology, I decided, yep, this is definitely something that I should invest my time and energy in. And at the same time, another faculty member here, Carol Willis, had been contacted by various people, and the two of us connected early on in the summer and basically decided to dedicate our summer to getting COVID-19 molecular tools up and running for the state of Colorado, because we had seen the interest. So I also had a previous, network built with some wastewater treatment, important people in the wastewater treatment industry here in Colorado. Jim McQuarrie from Denver Metro reached out to him, and he had already built really a collaborative of wastewater treatment people across Colorado who were interested in this idea. And so really over the summer, we all just decided to collaboratively work together to build a program in wastewater epidemiology for the state of Colorado, not really knowing where the money was going to come from for sure, or if it was going to work out. We all just decided it was important and we were going to put in our own time and our own energy and get this up and running. And if we could show that it could work, we could ask for funding. Our Vice President for Research here, Alan Rudolph, put in $20,000 at the beginning of the project to help us buy reagents and get a technician to help us out. Denver Metro purchased a piece of equipment that they allowed us to use up at CSU to get that project going. And then once we were able to show that we had methods that worked and that this was, a viable concept, we were able to bring a project to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and they were able to fund us to do that work. So we've been monitoring 20 locations for the state of Colorado at their wastewater treatment plants for twice a week now since August. And all of that information is now available on a public dashboard for the state of Colorado. Citizens can see that data, and epidemiologists across the state use that data as another line of evidence, another piece of information about how we're doing in this pandemic and what decisions need to be made to keep people safe and, to manage hospital capacity and all those kinds of things. Well, and then we were able to, use these same tools, these same techniques to roll out a program of monitoring wastewater in the dormitories and residences here on campus at CSU. And we've been doing that since school started last fall, and we're monitoring those locations 3 times a week. In the fall, we use that data to identify buildings where people were infected in order to direct people in those buildings to go get tested with nasal and the saliva testing, and that's really helped us manage the level of outbreaks on campus and stay open for as many face-to-face classes as we can have. And so those what I really love about what we've done in that COVID wastewater monitoring space is it's just been built on local networks and relationships and good people who are on the ground here in our state who said, yeah, we're gonna invest, we're gonna build this program, we're gonna work together, and we're gonna help protect our communities. And just everyone chipped in, and it's just really been a phenomenal experience to work with so many different people to do something that has helped protect our state and our university.
Yeah, fantastic example of utilizing those networks of people, professional networks. You mentioned someone from Denver Metro. I'm sure you've worked with faculty in sort of the more biomolecular sciences, people who are more familiar with viruses and that sort of thing. But it was brought on by this terrible pandemic, but it was sort of a pressure cooker for a lot of innovation. And now, like you said, 20 different sites across the state have this extra line of defense for monitoring epidemics. And that's hopefully not just SARS COVID-2, but it'll be be able to be implemented in a future way. I had a question for those who are sort of more interested in the technical aspects of that project. What's the exact sort of molecular analysis tool that's being used to identify the virus, and then sort of what's the time turnaround theoretically for when someone would shed the virus, and then you'd be able to test it and get a notification that, okay, there is virus present in this location.
Right. Okay. I'll just answer the latter question first. I think that there's not. I can't give you a definitive answer. It varies between individuals, but it's early, probably a couple of days. We are essentially measuring virus that's shed in feces, and as you might imagine, there aren't a lot of studies of the levels of SARS-CoV-2 virus in the feces of people who don't yet feel sick. So getting a really concrete and defensible answer to your question is hard, but it's quite early. And then to turn to the technical question of how we're doing this, in wastewater, the virus is there at relatively dilute concentrations. So the first step, so we remove some, the solids from the wastewater, and then we need to concentrate the virus. And so we use a concentrating filter that captures the virus on that filter. Then we're able to elute or get the virus off that filter, break open the viral particles and get the genetic material out. And the molecular tests are based on detecting specific genes that are associated with the virus. And the technology that we use in wastewater is essentially the exact same technology that's used in the RNA tests. If you go get a nasal swab to try to determine if you have COVID as an individual. And the technique is called polymerase chain reaction. And it relies on an enzyme that makes many copies of a specific gene. And that enzyme has to be directed by what we call primers, which are little pieces of DNA that match the gene. And so when you make many copies of this specific gene using primers that match, you then can detect what you've produced. So we call that the amplicon. And so there's a couple different versions of this polymerase chain reaction. For wastewater, we're not really just interested in a yes/no answer. We're interested in how much. We're interested in quantification. So there's a couple of technologies out there. One is called real-time PCR or quantitative PCR. And then the other one is called digital droplet PCR. We're using digital droplet PCR because it works a little bit better with wastewater. It's less sensitive to false negatives or falsely low values due to contaminants. There's a lot of stuff in wastewater, and let's just leave it at that. Some of that stuff can make your measurement inaccurate, and digital droplet PCR is a little bit more robust in the face of some of those challenges. So that's the particular technology that we're using to detect the SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, Jess and I, both with our biological backgrounds, have used PCR before, and but in a wildly different context. I had used it as an undergrad in trying to identify a gene in soil microbes for nitrogen fixation. It's this fascinating tool that it seems like it's really evolved quite a bit the past several decades. To the method has been really well worked out, and it's become this really powerful mechanism for all sorts of applications.
PCR is like the backbone of the modern molecular world. So you use quantitative PCR and digital droplet PCR, sequencing, all the next generation sequencing technologies. Most of them involve a first step where you have to amplify the genes, and that's essentially done with PCR. It's an incredibly useful tool. I literally can't imagine where the field of molecular biology would be without the invention of PCR.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, to sort of round out the hour of our conversation, you're wondering if you can sort of look towards the future and think about what are some thoughts you'd like to give on what you see as an important aspects of being an environmental engineer. You mentioned collaboration a little bit earlier.
Yeah, whenever I talk to students and they say they're interested in environmental issues, and so they want to be an environmental engineer, I try to touch them a little bit more about what things they like to do and what skills they have, because there are so many problems that need to be addressed that require so many different perspectives and so many different skill sets. Mm-hmm. And so I think as we move forward as a civilization and think about how to develop more sustainable ways of doing things, we need people with that sustainability mindset everywhere. And so I guess, I just want to answer this question a little bit more broadly. Think about your skills and your interests and your unique gifts and how those can connect with the problems. Because there's so many different places that need innovation, and everyone has talents that are unique. So that would be the starting point, right? Figure out what your unique gifts are. And I was thinking of a quote yesterday from Oscar Wilde. He says, "Be yourself. Everybody else is taken," something like that. And I think that's such a great quote, because so many times, even at this stage of my career, I look to the successes of other people and how I can model myself after those successes. But at the end of the day, you can learn from other people, but you have to go back to, well, what are your unique skills and what can you contribute? So I would begin there. And then I think we've talked a lot today about the various skills that can make you successful and allow you to succeed in your career. An engineering degree provides such an excellent background for critical thinking skills, problem solving, design, but supplement that with an understanding of the broader context of in other disciplines. Understand sociology and public health, or policy, and develop good communication skills, because all of those things will carry you into a position where you can have more impact.
Definitely. Absolutely. Those are so great closing thoughts. I'll ask my co-host, Jess, do you have anything you'd like to add to that to close us out?
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate just that focus on learn what your skills are. Just because I feel like you're an example that you had these specific set of skills, and then you were called upon to address, a problem that was kind of outside of your normal area of research, but how it's been so fulfilling for you to be a part of that project, and how even if we just, focus on like what we're good at, like kind of the sky's the limit on what problems we can help come up with solutions for. So I really appreciate that. And I think it's just an encouragement to, when you're never really stuck in one vein. There's so many different problems out there, and the more skills you have, the more you can play in finding different solutions. And so with that, I was just wondering if anyone wanted to learn more about your research and what projects you've been worked on, what are the best ways for people to reach out or to look that up?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would do is direct people to my website at Colorado State University, where they can see the current projects that we have and some of the publications that we have, and access, the references and read some of that work. And then certainly my email address is listed there for follow-up questions, particularly if students are interested in coming and studying with us for a master's or a PhD and working in some of the areas that I talked about today. The best would be to just reach out to me by email.
Fantastic. And we'll link your website and the email in the notes of the YouTube video. So that'll be available for listeners. So thank you, Dr. DeLong, for joining us this morning and having a really fascinating conversation about your work. We really enjoyed it.
Yes.
Thank you to our listeners for joining our EWRI-CSU podcast. We appreciate you all for listening. Appreciate any feedback you'd be able to give, and go Rams.